The stage lights were still hot when the sound came. Not music, not applause. A gunshot. Close. So close the air itself seemed to split open. It was 1970, late autumn, and the Caesars Palace showroom had just emptied. Frank Sinatra had finished his set 20 minutes earlier. The audience had left drunk on martinis and the kind of performance that made you forget the world outside. But Frank hadn't left. He was backstage, jacket off, tie loose, sitting in a chair with a glass of Jack Daniels resting on his knee. His bodyguard, a man named Jilly Rizzo, stood near the door. Jilly wasn't tall, wasn't broad, but he had the kind of presence that made people step back without thinking. He'd been with Frank for years, not just muscle, a friend, the kind of man who understood silence better than most people understood words. Then the door opened. A man walked in, mid-30s, slicked hair, thin mustache. His name was Carl. He worked security for the casino, but tonight he wasn't wearing his uniform. He was wearing a cheap suit and carrying a revolver tucked into his waistband. His eyes were red, not from crying, from something harder, something that had been sitting in his chest for months, maybe years, waiting for the right moment to break. Frank looked up. He didn't stand. He just watched. Carl stopped a few feet from the chair. His hand was shaking. Not a lot. Just enough that you could see it if you were looking. He didn't say anything at first. He just stared at Frank like he was trying to decide if this was real or if he'd wake up tomorrow in his apartment with the same life he had yesterday. Jilly moved. Not fast. Just a step to the left, positioning himself between Carl and Frank. His hand didn't go to his gun, not yet, but his shoulders squared. His jaw set. He was ready. Carl's voice came out tight, strangled. "You don't remember me." Frank tilted his head. His face didn't change. He'd seen this before. Not exactly this, but close enough. Men who thought they knew him. Men who thought he owed them something. Men who carried grudges like they were holy relics. "Should I?" Frank asked. His voice was calm, almost polite. Carl laughed. It wasn't a real laugh. It was the sound of something breaking. "My brother," Carl said. Vic Romano. You got him fired. 2 years ago. Right here. This casino. He worked tables. Blackjack. Best dealer they had. Never missed a shift. Never stole a dime. Then you walk in one night, drunk, losing, and you say he's cheating. You didn't even look at him twice. You just said it. And they believed you. Because you're Frank Sinatra. Frank didn't flinch. He took a sip of his drink. Slow. Deliberate. Then he set the glass down on the small table beside him. He looked at Carl. Really looked at him. Not with pity. Not with anger. Just looked. "I don't remember that," Frank said. "Of course you don't," Carl said. His hand moved to his waistband. Fingers brushed the grip of the revolver. "You probably say 100 things like that. You don't think about it. But Vic did. He thought about it every day. He couldn't get another job. Not in this town. Not after you put a word on him. He started drinking. Lost his apartment. Lost his girl. And 6 months ago he put a gun in his mouth and pulled the trigger. The room went silent. Not the kind of silence that comes from waiting. The kind that comes from something too heavy to carry. Jilly's hand moved to his holster. His fingers wrapped around the grip of his own gun. He didn't draw it. Not yet. But his eyes were locked on Carl. Watching. Calculating. If Carl's hand moved another inch, Jilly would pull. And he wouldn't miss. Frank didn't move. He just sat there, looking at Carl. His face was unreadable. He'd been accused of a lot of things in his life. Some of them were true. Some weren't. But he'd learned a long time ago that defending yourself didn't change anything. People believed what they needed to believe. "I'm sorry about your brother," Frank said. Carl's face twisted. "You're sorry?" "Yes." "You think that's enough?" Frank didn't answer. He just kept looking at him. Steady. Unflinching. Not because he was trying to intimidate. Because he was listening. Carl pulled the gun. Not fast. Not like in the movies. Slow. Like he was lifting something that weighed more than it should. He pointed it at Frank. His hand was still shaking. Worse now. The barrel wavered. Left. Right. Up. Down. His finger was on the trigger. 1 pound of pressure. That's all it would take. Jilly drew. Smooth. Clean. One motion. His gun came up and leveled at Carl's head. Point-blank range. Less than 6 feet. If he fired, Carl would be dead before he hit the floor. But he didn't fire. He waited. Frank raised his hand. Not toward Carl. Toward Jilly. Palm out. A gesture. Simple. Clear. Wait. Jilly didn't lower his gun. But he didn't pull the trigger either. His jaw tightened. His finger hovered. He was a breath away from ending this, one breath. But he held. Carl's voice cracked. "He was all I had. You understand that? He was all I had." Frank nodded. Slow. Small. Not patronizing. Just acknowledging. "I believe you," Frank said. Carl's face crumpled. His shoulders shook. Tears streamed down his face. The gun dipped. Just a little. His grip loosened. Not a lot. But enough. "I should kill you," Carl said. His voice was barely a whisper now. "I should. I came here to do it. I told myself I would." Frank didn't say anything. He just waited. Carl's hand dropped. Not all the way. The gun was still up. Still pointed. But it was lower now. His chest heaved. He was sobbing. Full, ugly sobs. The kind that came from somewhere deep. Somewhere that had been locked away for too long. "I can't," Carl said. "I can't do it." Jilly's finger stayed on the trigger. He was ready. If Carl raised that gun again, even an inch, it was over. But Carl didn't raise it. He just stood there, shaking, crying, holding a gun he couldn't bring himself to use. Frank stood up, slow, careful. He didn't move toward Carl. He just stood. His hands were at his sides. Open. Empty. "Put the gun down," Frank said. Not a command, not a plea, just a statement. Like he was saying the sky is blue. Carl looked at him. His face was a mess. Snot. Tears. Pain. He looked like a man who'd been hollowed out and left standing. "Why?" Carl asked. "Why should I?" "Because it won't bring him back," Frank said. "And it won't make the pain go away. It'll just make it worse." Carl's hand trembled. The gun wavered. His breathing was ragged, uneven. He was breaking. You could see it. The walls he'd built around himself were crumbling. And underneath them was just a man who'd lost his brother and didn't know how to live with it. "He was a good man," Carl said. "I believe that too," Frank said. Carl's grip loosened. The gun slipped. Just a little. His fingers uncurled. Slowly. One at a time. The revolver fell. It hit the floor with a dull thud. The sound echoed in the small room like a bell tolling. Jilly didn't lower his gun. Not yet. He was still watching. Still ready. Carl dropped to his knees. He put his face in his hands. He sobbed. Deep, guttural sobs. The kind that shook his whole body. He looked small. Broken, like a man who just realized he'd been carrying something too heavy for too long and had finally let it go. Frank walked over, slow, careful. He knelt down beside Carl, not touching him, just close. He didn't say anything. He just stayed there, quiet, present. Jilly lowered his gun. He didn't holster it, but he lowered it. His eyes stayed on Carl, watching, waiting. But the tension in his shoulders eased, just a little. Frank reached out. His hand hovered over Carl's shoulder. For a moment, he hesitated. Then he placed it there. Gentle. Firm. A hand that said, "You're not alone." Carl didn't pull away. He just cried. They stayed like that for a long time. Minutes, maybe more. Time didn't seem to matter. The showroom outside was empty. The casino beyond was still alive. Bells ringing, people laughing, money changing hands. But in that small room backstage, there was only silence. And two men, one broken, one trying to hold the pieces together. Eventually, Carl's sobs quieted. His breathing steadied. He lifted his head. His face was red, puffy. He looked at Frank like he was seeing him for the first time. "I'm sorry," Carl said. Frank shook his head. "Don't be." "I almost." "But you didn't," Frank said. "That's what matters." Carl wiped his face with the back of his hand. He looked at the gun on the floor, then at Jilly. Jilly was still holding his weapon, still watching. But his face had softened, just a little. "You could have shot me," Carl said to Jilly. Jilly didn't answer. He just looked at Frank. Then, back at Carl. He holstered his gun. Slow, deliberate. The sound of the leather snapping shut was final. Definitive. Frank helped Carl to his feet. Carl swayed. Unsteady. Frank held his arm, steadied him. "Come on," Frank said. "Let's get you some air." He led Carl toward the door. Jilly picked up the revolver from the floor. He checked it. Fully loaded. 6 rounds. He emptied the chamber. The bullets clinked as they fell into his palm. He pocketed them. Then he tucked the empty gun into his jacket. They walked outside. The night air was cool. Dry. The kind of desert air that made everything feel sharp. Clear. Carl leaned against the wall. He closed his eyes. Breathed deep. Frank stood beside him. He pulled out a pack of cigarettes. Offered one to Carl. Carl took it. Frank lit it for him. Then lit one for himself. They smoked in silence. The glow of the cigarettes was the only light between them. "What happens now?" Carl asked. Frank exhaled. Smoke drifted into the night. "You go home," Frank said. "You get some sleep. Tomorrow you wake up, and you decide what kind of man you want to be." Carl laughed. Bitter. Hollow. "I don't know if I can." "You can," Frank said, "because you already did the hardest part." Carl looked at him, confused. "You put the gun down," Frank said. "That's harder than pulling the trigger." Carl's eyes welled up again. But he didn't cry. He just nodded. Slow, heavy. Like he was accepting something he'd been fighting for a long time. They finished their cigarettes. Frank stubbed his out against the wall. Carl did the same. Frank put a hand on Carl's shoulder. "Go home," Frank said. "And if you ever need anything, you know where to find me." Carl looked at him. Really looked at him. Not with anger, not with blame, just looked. "Thank you," Carl said. Frank nodded. He didn't say anything else. He just watched as Carl walked away. Slow, unsteady, but walking. Jilly came up beside Frank. They stood there in the dark, silent. "You took a hell of a risk," Jilly said. Frank shrugged. "Maybe. He could have killed you. But he didn't." Jilly shook his head. He looked at Frank. Not with judgment, not with admiration. Just looked. "You're a strange man, Frank." Frank smiled, small, tired. "Yeah," he said. "I know." They went back inside. The casino was still alive. Music, laughter, chips clattering. Life going on like nothing had happened, because for everyone else, nothing had. But in that small room backstage, something had shifted. Something quiet. Something that couldn't be measured or explained. Just felt. Frank didn't talk about it. Not to the press, not to his friends, not even to Jilly. It wasn't a story to tell. It was just a moment. A moment where two men stood at the edge of something terrible and chose to step back. Carl never came back to Caesar's Palace. He left Las Vegas a few weeks later, moved to Arizona, got a job at a hardware store, lived a quiet life. He never spoke about that night, not to anyone. But sometimes, late at night, when he couldn't sleep, he'd think about it. About the gun on the floor, about Frank's hand on his shoulder, about the choice he made. And he'd wonder what would have happened if he'd made a different one. Frank went back to performing. Same stage, same lights, same songs. But something was different. Not in the performance, in the way he carried himself. Like he'd been reminded of something he'd forgotten. That power wasn't just about what you could do. It was about what you chose not to do. Jilly never forgot either. He'd pulled his gun 100 times in his life. But that was the only time he didn't pull the trigger when he should have. Not because he wasn't fast enough. Not because he hesitated. But because Frank asked him to wait. And in that waiting, something changed. Not just for Carl. For all of them. Years later, someone asked Jilly about that night. About what happened. About why he didn't shoot. Jilly just shrugged. Frank knew something I didn't, he said. He knew that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is give someone a chance to be better than they think they are. The reporter pressed, asked for details. Names, dates. Jilly shook his head. It's not a story, he said. It's just something that happened. And some things don't need to be told. They just need to be remembered. And that was all he said. The sound that changed Las Vegas forever wasn't the gunshot that almost happened. It was the sound of a gun hitting the floor, a sound that echoed in a small room backstage and rippled out into the lives of 3 men who were forever marked by the choice they made in that moment. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was just a sound. A small, quiet sound. The sound of letting go.